tiny doors. And so they, okay, so they're gonna have to be, oh, they will. I didn't know they had. I thought it was all screened. Okay, well, you know what? I was thinking. But it had like windows you could slide to, but that's really good. I know, that's what I'm saying is you slide them over the screens, the glass. So you could close, oh, and it, yeah. Well. Whereas Janet Chris, if they're not their bedroom, the hot tub, so they'll use that every day, because hot tubs, I mean, they have a reason to go in, you know, but you know, hot tub, they're, I think that.
Oh, Ed Scoop, I had Ed Scoop.
Maybe, okay, yes, James, Faces, sounding.
He's in K-Stater.
Well, maybe in.
Is that the explanation?
I don't see them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I talked to him, he was in like the Seattle area. But he got his degree at
Yeah.
K-State.
Yeah,
Um,
right, I know he's from Topeka.
and I met him in Minnesota, at an event,
Yeah. I thought she said, yeah. Remember she had in there.
And
You know, which one may see the first one.
The penny fly one,
Because they could have made the,
I know that. And then,
well, yeah, exactly,
Look up.
yeah,
doesn't
right.
matter.
That was-
Yeah, I can tell you what the second
Right.
is.
I think that's kind of a cute idea, but if you don't use it, what's
Definitely.
Yeah, I really just think it's issues or not, maybe they get more furniture, I mean, you know, you could have a gorgeous fall. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, actually, I did update the website, the webpage, I forgot. Here, look at that.
Or personally, they'll plant some this fall.
Here.
If they're in outside and. They like the tree.
That's right.
Oh, my, all those things. Yeah, maybe the trees.
I forgot that I did update our website with the current information, so.
Alan, that's.
I was on it just to get this information today. Didn't look further.
I thought there. Out there. Not me, because my mom's.
Sweet.
Oh.
I was waiting until 7.
Oh, sure, so much idea left. Would you like some? Here, thank you. Oh, no. This one. And then- I just did it.
So we're, she did the 100 Kansas poem anthology, right? Miriam Nickelberg.
Like she did in winter. That was good.
I'm pretty sure she did, yeah,
That's
and,
what we had there.
I feel like, well, that was a really cool book. It was,
Sure.
way to discover Kansas poets, you know. One of our libraries called the got lost.
I'm not sure if it's that anthology, but I know he did, doing something, so they're like, we're adding to this.
Oh, wait, now, for crying out loud.
But I mean, I know they do their themes chapbooks,
Yeah, the
and
chapbooks,
this year
right.
will be the stars or the
sky.
sky, yeah.
That's great.
So that's supposed to like also coincide with Ada Lamone's visit to Salina in October.
Right, that's
Right, or maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's got to have these pods. Go new. Yeah, so it could be that. Do you know what the history is of this, like why that exists? And
the sculpture, who did the sculpture? I think it's a local ceramic artist, right?
Well, maybe she's a big-
Blue sky sculpture. So the painting on the sculpture is by local, Phil App. And he also did the mural design with the clouds on the ceramic tiles next to the paintings. Then I think that what was it? I think it's Conrad Snyder. No, it doesn't. That could be wrong.
And then they had that case there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is him. So it's both local artists. Conrad Snyder, the ceramic artist, he does like large scale stuff like that. Very cool. Actually, there's sculpture videos outside which library, library surrounding their
I was just thinking.
their what do you call it, stanchions driving through the building.
Yeah.
Did sculptures to surround those, make them look good.
Oh, all right. Maybe I'll do that. Otherwise,
Phil Eck is a very popular Western painter.
I liked it. We stopped by before we got there.
Conrad Snyder, he had big plans for an art, like Sedgwick County, park to do kind of like a land, like maybe land art, maybe you could call it that, where he was gonna re-landscape a big chunk of the park and turn it into a large scale art piece that would incorporate the ceramics. I don't think it's happened yet. I think, he's trying to get funding for it, but it would be really cool if they did it. We call it the Sedgwick County Art Park. Well, I'll go ahead and say hello and introduce you. It's good. Okay. Hello. Oh. Thank you all for being with us, and those of you online as well. I am Sam Jack, I'm a librarian here, and we are pleased and honored to have with us the Poet Laureate of Kansas, Traci Brimhall. I'll tell you a bit more about her in a second, but first I have to put in a few plugs for things that are coming up at the library. July is our second month of summer reading program, which includes adult summer reading program. So these programs are part of it. Tomorrow night, we have got a Humanities Kansas Speakers Bureau talk presented by Mary Ann Thompson. It's called Married to Adventure, Osa and Martin Johnson's Films. The Johnsons were documentary filmmakers in the early 20th century, and they traveled the world doing their filming from the South Seas to Africa. So she's going to tell us about their work and kind of re-examine it in a modern context and what it could mean to us today. So that's going to be really cool. Then a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, July 23rd at 7 p.m., we have our fourth Tuesday photography series. We're welcoming back local photographer Jim, well, relatively local, he lives near, photographer Jim Griggs, and Jim is going to talk about light painting, which is where you take control of the lighting of your photograph in a really active way to get these cool effects that look like you couldn't possibly have done it with just a camera, but you did. And he is actually going to, I think, we're going to turn off the lights and he is going to do a demonstration of different things you can do with like flashlights and long exposure and stuff. That's going to be really neat. Then on Friday, July 26th, those are both basically evening time. Tomorrow's program is 6:30 p.m. and then next week from tomorrow, the fourth photography program is at 7 p.m. I should say that. And then on Friday, July 26th, I think this is our last summer reading event per se. It's the last one in our NPL After Dark summer series, which is for adults ages 18 plus. Friday from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. we are going to have Grown Up Game Zone. So Game Zone is a program we have for teens after school, teens and tweens after school on Mondays and Wednesdays. This grown-up version is going to be adults playing board games and playing video games if you want, doing whatever you think is fun, and we'll have prizes and I think there's mention of prizes, but you definitely get to play games. So with that, I hope you will, and there's lots more on our website. We've always got book clubs going on and stuff. So I hope that you will all take a look and keep joining us at the library. Now I will just share a bit about Traci and then turn it over to her. And I think she'd tell you about when she's ready to take questions or have interaction and stuff. I think she's got some cool stuff for us to do. So Traci Brimhall is professor of creative writing and narrative medicine at Kansas State University. She's the author of 4 four poetry collections, and her next book, Love Prodigal, will be out, I believe she said in November, right? So I'm sure we'll be ordering a copy of that for the library, and we'll look forward to that. Her poems have appeared in publications such as The New Yorker, The Nation, The New Republic, Poetry Magazine, New York Times Magazine, and Best American Poetry. She's received fellowships from National Endowment for the Arts, the National Park Service, and Purdue Library's Special Collection to study the lost poem drafts of Amelia Earhart. And she is the current poet laureate for the state of Kansas, and I think you said your term continues through 2026.
Yes.
So, all right, well, let's give her a little hook here.
Coming out. So my talk is about 45 minutes and it's interactive the whole time, and then there's time at the end for questions. So I call this talk, Why Can't the Heart Stop Asking? Poetry as Discovery, because my son and I spent a year cataloging questions, and we would just journal questions every day. And you'll see this question come up in the poem that we check in on later. But I'm a big lover of questions and what makes a question a good question. And we started on our question journey because he told me one day by a campfire that I was a boring conversationalist because I was just enjoying being quiet together. And I said, well, a great way to start a conversation is to ask a good question. And so we started keeping track of our questions.
Oh, sorry.
Just have to go.
Oh, yeah, I'm just trying to get the screen share going on the Zoom as well, so let me, sorry. Oh, there's a little bit of awkwardness, but there we go, share. And, okay, you should be good now.
Okay, so I have the sort of talk divided up into 3 separate questions. One, going around and talking about poetry and being a poet. People really like me to define poems for them. So I will not be giving you a definition of like 4 stanzas with rhymes, or none of those, or how I would define it, but people really want me to have a definition for them. Or would you call this a poem? I have a very simple definition. You'll like it, I hope. But then people, I'm constantly being asked also to defend the role of art. It's not a dance exam.
Oh, shoot, okay, now. Now. Sorry.
So people constantly want me to defend art or defend poetry, or why even poems? But how can poetry help us? What does it bring to our lives? Why is it something we might want or need? But also, why is sharing poetry important? Because I do think it is an art that people associate with a lot of solitude. So we're going to think about why the connection of poetry is important. However, it is important also that I say that the talk, my gas money was paid for today by the Kansas Arts Commission. It used to be the Kansas Creative Arts and Industries Commission. They're trying to rebrand as the Kansas Arts Commission because people said that was way too many letters. But it is the Kansas Arts Commission that makes the Poet Laureate program of the state possible for doing literary arts advocacy, for talks like this and other initiatives. We have poetry program coming to High Plains Public Radio. We're bringing poems to the state fair. Y'all live close to Hutch, so you might be there at the state fair. We'll have poems up at the state fair this year, and lots of other great things, thanks to the Kansas Arts Commission. So this is also, sometimes when I do this talk, people get very anxious about the fact that I do have pens out, and I am gonna ask you to write a little bit. If you're like, absolutely not, you can't make me, and you can't even give me a failing grade, that's really acceptable. I really respect someone's no. If you do not want to participate in any of the things that I ask you to do, that is fine, and you're right, I can't make you, and I'm not going to try. But I would love if you would like to participate, especially with such a small group. That hopefully it's kind of fun and there's no judgment. And also I like it when really funny and silly things happen when I make you write. So if you're afraid of fun and silly things, you're right, you probably shouldn't participate. But I really hope that you decide that you want to do this. For those online, I'm going to try and give some instructions on how it can work online. It's a little bit more fun and spontaneous in the room, but I can try and give the writing instruction for online as well. Okay, so the first thing is, how do you define poetry? People really want me to have a very serious and like tough, critical answer. But it's one of my least favorite like things to try and do, because people want, they want me to do better than these famous people. So Edgar Allan Poe said it's the rhythmical creation of beauty. Robert Frost, very graphically said it's a way of taking life by the throat, which some poems are that intense. Emily Dickinson also said that she didn't want to define it, but she knew it, she could feel it. She said, I feel as if the top of my head has been taken off when I read a poem. So I don't know if you've ever had a reading experience or stood in front of art or gotten to the top of a mountain, and your whole body can kind of feel the experience. And I think she was one of those people as well. William Carlos Williams was very technical. He was a doctor, right? So he said it's a machine made out of words. Which I kind of like, especially when I want to take it apart and edit it and play with it. I like thinking of it as like, why isn't this, the clock isn't quite telling the time kind of thing. Trying to get the poem to work a little better. I like thinking about the machine part. Samuel Coleridge was just like, hey, it's just the best words in the best order, no big deal. I also really love this one by Marianne Moore, who said that it is imaginary gardens with real toads in them. And I really like that one, because I kind of do think that I'm often making some things up while also slipping in my own personal truths in them. Like sometimes I didn't see a robin out the window, I just wanted to write about seeing one, so sometimes I am writing something that didn't quite happen quite the way I'm writing it. But I sort of like, it's sort of revenge on circumstance when you get to make art about your life. But I really like all of these. None of them quite is as good, I think, as the answer a fourth grader gave, which was that a poem is an egg with a horse in it. And I love this definition, because there was already chuckles in the room, right? Like it surprised you. It's might even be memorable. Maybe if you forget everything else from this talk, maybe you'll leave and remember that a poem is an egg with a horse in it. But I love that there's also, well, one, it's a metaphor. A poem is an egg with a horse in it, right? So we're already getting a lesson in what poetry is, because the definition is a metaphor. But it's also something that a good metaphor or a good poem is, which is true on several levels. So one way to think about it is an egg with a horse in it. You could think of it as something small, or at least I tend to think chicken egg. That is our most common egg connection culturally, I feel, is the chicken ovum. And with a horse in it, I think we picture a full-size horse coming out of a tiny egg, and we're like, that absolutely is absurd. So you've got something very large inside something very small. And that's true of a poem. You have lots of big ideas, lots of big feelings, lots of big worlds in something that's just a few lines. And so in that way, I think it's really true. It's a metaphor, and it's got that going for it. I also think, I do know that mammals also come from eggs, but when you tell me egg, I do think bird, or I think reptile. So like thinking of the laying of an egg is usually what I think of. And then you have a mammal inside a chicken egg. And so then you have something where you didn't expect to find it. And I think that that's another definition of poetry, or another thing. Oh my gosh. We were just talking about our dead Greeks, and one of is Aristotle or Plato or somebody, maybe it was Plato in the Republic, said that a poem should both delight and instruct. And for me, there's something of the surprise in that. So I love that this definition enacts a metaphor, which is core to poetry, is true on a couple of levels, which I think really good poems and good metaphors can do. So for me, I've never seen a better definition of a poem. I've done this exercise. I did this exercise with second graders where we looked at this definition and we made a list of big things. We made a list of small things, and then we just put the big things into the small things and then found out what it could be a definition of. And my favorite was a second grader said, love is an eye with a home inside it. I've never written anything that good. That was just a second grader putting big things into small things. It was so wonderful. So I mean, it gives this whole recipe for other ways to define really big feelings and ideas. So that is my definition of a poem. What I want you to do for our interactive portion here is, so that definition has something abstract, a poem. What is a poem? And it has something concrete and specific. It has the description of an egg with a horse in it. So what I want us to do is to also think about abstract things, because abstract things are what poems are usually about. They're about thoughts, they're about feelings, they're about big ideas, where when I say it, we all think something different. Like when that second grader said love, they were probably thinking about their mom or their cat, I don't know. I think about my child, and love can mean wildly different array of things. It is an abstract concept, as is joy, as is sadness, as is anger, but also ideas. So like ideas like faith or freedom. These are big concepts, but you define them, you make them particular, like that student did with an I with a home inside it, by comparing it to something. So we see this all the time. We see it in, we are all culturally familiar with Forrest Gump. I hope life is like a box of chocolates. The first time you hear it, you're like, I don't know, makes your fingers dirty, or like, what is it? What is the end of the phrase?
Never know what you're gonna get.
You never know what you're gonna get. You're gonna stop by the Russell Stover when you're on I-70 and you're gonna get your box of mixed things, and if you don't check your key, you're gonna end up with the coconut or the peanut butter, you don't know. But it's full of, delicious treats, and you're just not quite sure which one you're going to end up with. But the first time you hear life compared to a box of chocolates, before it almost became cliche, you were like, what? Why are those two things being compared? Because if you say like a lemon is like a lime, you're like, yes, actually correct. A leopard is like a cheetah, like, yes, in many ways, right? If you compare two similar things, there's no surprise. It's that metaphor means to carry across. So you are usually getting something surprising. So worry is like a rocking chair. Have people heard of this one? It gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. But like, it's that comparison where you're like, oh, why? That doesn't actually, rocking chairs kind of sound relaxing, but then you're like, oh yeah, now I can see it. Emily Dickinson said, hope is a thing with feathers. So what I'd like you to do is, everybody has pens, and there's a little strip of scrap paper, so you don't need to worry about the fact there's words on the back of it. But on your scrap piece of paper, I would like you to write your own simile today. So you can use life or worry or hope, but you could also use love or joy or sadness or freedom. But is there one that's sort of been on your mind as you were having lunch with a friend or walking the dog? Is there a worry that has been bothering you? Is there a joy that has been sitting on your heart today and making you feel good? Is there a hope you have for tomorrow? But what is it? Just something big, an abstraction, life, worry, hope, and then compare it to something. There is no judgment in this room, and you can just say sadness is like a rainy day, or happiness is like a sunny day. You can, as long as you're making a simile, that's the only requirement. I'm gonna give you a minute while I hydrate, to write your own simile that takes something abstract and compares it to something concrete. And everybody online, I hope you do the same right now.
Don't know what it means, but it came into my head. There it goes. Okay.
It's like I've never written a simile before. Keep scratching everything out. It's gonna stick with my first bad one. It's fine. Okay, does everybody have a mediocre simile? Mine's so mediocre. I was like, no, I need to write a new one, and then I was like, no, actually. It's fine that I wrote a medium one. Didn't write a great one. Okay. Okay, the next thing I want you to do is to take that piece of paper that has that simile and tear at the word like. So I have pieces like a spring Kansas rain in bare feet. I'm just gonna rip it at the word like.
Oh, you want, yeah.
And then what I'd like you to do is now you should have an abstraction, you should have peace, love, joy, hope, fear, whatever in one hand, and then a description in the other. And I want, you get to keep your anxiety, that's yours. Your fear, your hope, your joy, your sadness, keep your abstract piece, and then swap your concrete description. I'll take your other one, there we go. Make a new friend. Oh my God, we had a good swap because mine now becomes pieces like a scream in space. If you had abstractions that are too similar, it might not generate as much surprise.
Yeah. Well.
I do too think.
Yeah, if joy and happiness swap, you often don't end up with a surprise. But I got a fun surprise. So one of the reasons I like to do this, so I ended up with peace is like a scream in space. What are some, what did you have, for your abstraction?
Loneliness is.
Oh, so loneliness is like a spring Kansas rain and bare feet. I kind of like it, but I think it depends on what loneliness feels like. I mean, that could be really beautiful, just standing in the rain alone could also be kind of cool. I don't know. I think that's interesting. What other ones did people end up with? Anybody else willing to share? What did you get?
Hope is my dog in my lap.
Aww, hope is my dog in my lap. I love that. Sam, what did you end up with?
Fear is like looking under a rock.
Oh, dang. Sometimes it can be. Fear is like looking under a rock. Yeah, yes. Would you mind sharing yours?
Joy is like acid rain.
Oh my, oh gosh. Joy is like acid rain. I mean, Venus is full of awful, disgusting storms, and she's the goddess of love, supposedly, but she's got a really nasty planet, so who knows? But one of the reasons I like to do this, is to come up with wonderful lines like pieces like a scream in space, which I did not see coming. And for me, also, when I sit down to write, Robert Frost also said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And I really love when surprises come out when I write. And for me, that's often when the language starts to feel alive and kind of take over. That's really satisfying for me. And also the definition of poetry that we read was a surprise. That is an egg with a horse inside it. Surprise, for me, is one of the key ingredients for a poem. I feel like when you start out cooking, especially if you're not a trained chef, you need the recipe, you need everything written out and the amounts that you're putting in. But for me, with a poem, I don't want to have like, and then I will see a robin, and then I will write about that robin, and I will say something deep about the meaning of life on line 6. If I plan it out too much, if there's too much of like too specific of an organization or what I'm doing on first pass, surprise doesn't come out. And for me, one of the key satisfactions of writing is when the surprise happens. So there's that Robert Frost quote I just said, but yeah, that surprise is a major element, I think, of the pleasure as the writer. And I think also when we're the reader or the listener, we love it when those surprises come out, when that metaphor, when strange comparison, like peace being a scream in space happens. We're like, wow, did not see that coming. And sometimes like loneliness being standing in the rain, sometimes it can feel, maybe it feels true right away, like fear is like looking under a rock, and it really can be. But sometimes just like worry is like a rocking chair, you need the next line. And then all of a sudden the surprise of the line is like, yeah, for sure, worry is totally like that. So sometimes it also needs the next line. So sometimes I like to, do you remember those quizzes we would take in elementary school, where you'd have a list of things on one side and a list on the other, and you would match things on the sentence? I love to write similes like that, where I'll just have lists of things, and I'll just randomly, without looking, just see what sort of surprises my hand ends up making. And many fail, but also I don't need everything to be perfect. I don't need everything to be right. I really like to sit down and delight myself in play. Because once I became a parent too, I was like, so much learning happens with play, and the older we get, the less we do that. We just want to make the first draft the final one and to get it right every time. But if you're working to make it right, you don't get surprises. And I think surprises are where so much of our delight in poetry is happening. So for me, if a poem surprises me, if a poem delights me, even if it looks like a paragraph, I can call it a poem. Even if it's walking the dog and something unexpected happened, sometimes I say, I just lived a poem right now. When I can kind of feel it, when something kind of opens up inside me because of a surprise, that for me is a key piece of poetry. So, as people are also always asking me to do, what is the point of poetry? How can poetry help? What can poetry do maybe that other art forms can't do? And I'm not exactly gonna make that argument, because I think whatever's bringing you surprise and delight is pretty awesome. But William Carlos Williams did say it's difficult to get the news from poetry, yet people die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. So yeah, I did not get any of my New York Times headlines from poetry yet, but here is the beginnings of what I think I'm getting from poetry and why poetry is important. Leila Shetty said, all day the world makes its demands. There's so much of it. The world is begging to be noticed. And I am also guilty of putting my face in my phone and forgetting that the world would like to be noticed. Mary Oliver said, when it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. And I too want to always remain curious and ask questions about even those things I think I know all about already, and the people I feel like I already know really well. It's important to still be amazed by the world and amazed by everyone in it, but also our loved ones. The romantic poet, like capital R romantic from that period in history, John Keats, said in a letter to his brother, but I got it from the movie Bright Star, about his life. He said, John Keats, this guy whose poems we're still studying in school, he said, I still don't know how to work a poem out or work out a poem. A poem needs understanding through the senses. The point of diving into a lake is not immediately to swim to the shore, but to be in the lake, to luxuriate in the sensation of water. You do not work the lake out. It is an experience beyond thought. Poetry soothes and emboldens the soul to accept the mystery. Okay, that was a long quote, almost a paragraph up there. But what I love is this idea too of, one, the senses. When I was showing you those famous quotes about what a poem is, I said, do you sometimes get to the top of the mountain or stand in front of a piece of art or listen to a piece of music and can just feel the truth of it? Or like, I sing along to Taylor Swift. I don't know what key I'm in. I'm probably in the wrong one, but I am just feeling that with my body. I am within that. I'm not trying to and what did Taylor mean by this lyric? Which boyfriend was this? I don't care, and I frankly don't know. I personally don't know her dating history enough to try and solve her lyrics. I'm just enjoying the music. When we jump into the lake, it's not like, well, let's get our swim time in and let's do this, and is my step timer on, and you're not trying to solve the lake. But for some reason, whenever we sit in front of a poem, We think we need to be more clever. We think we need to figure out the puzzle of the poem. We very rarely just let ourselves be like, wow, that was weird and mysterious and beautiful, cool. And then let ourselves just not know. We're, I think, so intolerant of not knowing in every area of our lives, but especially because we carry Google around in our pockets with our phones. Or, man, what was I asked Alexa like at least 6 questions today. I was like, how do you do that? How do you convert that measurement? Who is this person in history? What is Kyrie Latin for? I just, can ask Alexa anything. I don't have to wonder. I can always find out. And it's one of the things I love about poetry, though, is often it's mysterious, or I feel like I understand the truth of it, but I'd be hard pressed to write a 5-paragraph essay about it. But that's most of what we learned about poetry, is that we need to know that Robert Frost turned left in the woods. He took a road, the paths diverged in a wood, and he took that left one, and now you need to write an essay about it. And I think the older I get, the less I know, even as I'm learning more and more all the time. And I need things that will soothe and embolden my soul to be more within the mysteries. And so that is one of the things that I think poetry brings us. It is a place to wonder. It is a place, unlike our maybe 8th grade teachers might have taught us or something, where we don't have to work the puzzle out. We can be in the lake. We can just enjoy what it makes us feel, or think in the moment. I definitely do no research before going to an art museum. I just walk into a room, just kind of see what gives me the tug, and then I just go stand in front of that painting for a while. But I'm not trying to become an expert at that painting even. I'm just feeling in front of something for a while. And I think poetry can do that for us, but so can art. So can your Taylor Swift songs on the radio. I really think all sorts of arts are really good for this practice, but we just have to also allow ourselves to wonder and not have to solve it. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke is a fantastic 20th century poet. And he has this very famous book called Letters to a Young Poet. In fact, his letters to a poet might have become more famous than any of his poems. But he has this great passage in there. This young man is trying to get all of the answers and how to have a career as a poet and how to be even better. And Rilke says, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And I think I wrote down this quote in my 20s, I wrote it down in my 30s, I keep it now in my journal in my 40s. I find it really useful because I still want answers. I still want to know. And I have to remind myself that a good question is a better North Star than any answer or any piece of advice. So on the back of, you have a poem and I want you to hold on to it. But on the back of the poem Spring Song, I want you to write down the answer to one. I have it in all caps there. One thing that you noticed today. Was it the robin outside the window? Was it something about this heat? Something that you ate this morning or afternoon? What happened today that surprised you? It doesn't have to be all of these things. These are prompting questions, but just write down one sentence, one thing you noticed today. Because again, we want to be bridegrooms married to amazement. Um. Beneath the sentence of what you noticed, or maybe you think it goes above, write your simile, even if it doesn't seem to fit. Even if, you know, you wrote about the robin at the window and you don't feel like loneliness in the rain fits, or you wrote about it being 103 and the rainstorm doesn't fit. Just try adding it. Just put the one thing you noticed and then add your simile next to it. There'll be another step later.
Why don't we do this one?
So the answer to my second question, even though I think the questions are better than answers, that I do think one of the things that poetry helps me do is the more I'm in the practice of noticing, the more I pay attention. So like in COVID, I was doing a sense journal. I would just write down things I saw, smelled, heard, felt, tasted, and I would notice like immediately when I started cooking, I would just be so present. Because I was really noticing like the texture of the paper garlic bulb, and I was noticing the smell of like, what's that smell when the onions hit the butter, and like, you know, because I knew I'd have to journal about it later. So instead of worrying about the laundry or worrying about the email or the phone call or, you know, what the kid was up to, I would just be very present in what I was doing. And the more I pay attention to the world, I often find that I'm much calmer when when I'm paying better attention to the moment that I'm in. And also, again, that embracing mystery, if I don't have to have the answer all the time, or don't have to fix it or solve it or predict the future, I think those things are really deeply related. But I think we pay better attention to our world, and again, also hopefully the people in it, not just the robins at the window. But I think poetry has the ability to help us be very within our present. And I think both of those things are related to that. Oh, and ask questions. I forgot to press it. Because again, I really feel like those questions can be genuinely helpful. And I feel like sometimes the question helps me make the next decision, not the answer. Sometimes just knowing what the question is, I'm like, aha, that's it. So thinking about why sharing poetry is important. So I don't think it's just important that we, you know, think about our lives or write about our lives or experience art. I think it's really important that we share art with other people. Ursula K. Le Guin is a very famous sci-fi writer, and she said that words are events. They do things, change things. They transform both speaker and hearer. They feed energy back and forth and amplify it. They feed understanding or emotion back and forth or amplify it. And sometimes I think, oh man, writers just think words do everything. But also, if you've ever said the wrong thing to somebody, or used words you didn't quite mean and had them misunderstand, or had, words have energy. I think we feel that most often when things go wrong in communication. Rather than when things go right. But I love the idea that words are events. Words themselves are already changing the air around them or the white space around them, that words are a big deal. I like believing that my words matter. So everybody does have that poem Spring Song with them. And you'll notice that just like up here, on the handout in front of you, there are some words that are italicized and some that are regular. We're gonna make this church for a moment. I got my degree in poetry, but I almost went to divinity school, and so this is my chance to pretend that I'm leading my congregation. When I will read the regular text, and when we get to the italicized part, if you have ever been a churchgoer, you'll know that that is the part where everybody speaks together as one. So I will start reading the poem, and then when we get to the italicized part, everyone will read that part together. And there's no like traditional poetry reason for this, other than I think it's a beautiful practice, and I think not only is it lovely to hear poetry, it's lovely to speak it. And it's also not something that we tend to do together, and I think it's a really nice thing to do together. So this poem is called Spring Song. Karen Miriam Goldberg is a former Kansas Poet Laureate and gave me permission to use her poem in her talk. Spring Song. What is it to wake at night, not watered down and overdrawn voices from the day, to see the space and not figure in the space?
To fall
In a dream and I realize it's a dream. What waits, wet as fire, on the end of the line? The rushing of wings, the billowing of thunderheads, the crashing of car into lamppost, the silvering of bark from tree, the waking suddenly for no reason. Meanwhile, insects reproduce themselves like breath. Birds loosen the sky with flight. Stratus clouds streak across the moon. Kisses stop, and stone breaks apart so easily that
It's clear
it had been cracked inside for a while. Each life a transference of water, each act just a way to move light around. Even knowing this, why can't the heart stop asking? So especially thinking of that John Keats quote and not solving for poems, I never talk about a poem the way I think people think English professors talk about a poem. I just love them. And I just talk about what I love about them. I don't say, and clearly in Karen's life, she had an incident in which this, like, well, I don't do that part. What I want to point out about what I love that I still think is still illustrative and helpful are things that we already talked about just this evening, that we see poems do, which we made our own similes. So I like this one here. Insects reproduce themselves like breath. So I read that and at first I'm like, insects are a cool line. And then I'm like, wait, what? What does it mean that insects reproduce themselves like breath? How is breath involved in reproduction? Okay, like what is breath? Like it's instinctual, it's automatic, it's constant. That is like insect reproduction. The cicadas are screaming on my tree back home. But yeah, insects reproduce themselves automatically, constantly, instinctually. Yes, that's right. That's true. And that simile, all of a sudden, I'm like, it's great when I take a second to take even more pleasure in it. We talked about, something big inside something small, or things that shouldn't be compared or put together. And one place I see that here is what waits, wet as fire on the end of the line. Like, wet as fire? What? But when I think about it, I can think about somebody drowning in flames. I can picture prairie burns where it looks like a little stream or river of fire gently moving across the landscape. I'm like, yes, totally true. So all of a sudden, all of these things that feel like, oh, that's not totally right. But the more you think about it, the more you're like, wow, totally. Or even the night being watered down by voices. It's sort of a metaphorical language, it's figurative speech, but we're getting something really, beautiful. And it's that surprise of how insects reproduce themselves. It's the surprise of fire being given water language that makes us extra excited from the poem, or at least makes me extra excited. I like that stuff. The poem is also, the first 3 sentences are all questions. What is it to wake? What waits? The rushing of this, the waking suddenly for no reason. It isn't until towards the very end of the poem that we start to get statements, sentences that aren't questions, but then we return, even knowing this, why can't the heart stop asking? And so I like that even though we often think of poems as a place to go for wisdom or the meaning of life, the meaning here, or so much of this poem, is just about the questions. What is it to wake, and what waits, and why, even knowing all that we know, why can't the heart stop asking these questions? Why won't it stop seeking even after we have all of these other answers? So those are some of the things that I notice and that I really love. And I could talk more about even more fun, cool things that there is to see, but I also think if you read this once and didn't stop to think about it, that's also really awesome. Just like I said, I sing along in the car without knowing the appropriate keys for music, because it gives me joy. And if it gives you joy to spend more time picking things apart and taking pleasure in these different elements, then great. Also, if you just want to eat your food because it's delicious, great. If you like to just notice the flavors of what you're eating, also awesome. Um, there we go. Another thing that I quite enjoy at thinking about these questions, that I think is really relevant is, Jonas Salk is, one of the fathers of vaccines, and he says, what people think of as the moment of discovery is the discovery of the question. So people think some great aha happened, but the aha was the question. It wasn't the solution. It was like, this is the right question. This will get us to the answer. But you know, the question is the whole journey, or it's teaching you what journey you need to make to get where you need to go. So it wasn't, you know, aha, now we have the vaccine. It was figuring out the question, or what was the insight that led to the discovery of the answer. And so I really like this because I also think people think of also like the scientific method as like, I have an idea and now we just prove how right I am. But not how long it takes to get to the right question. And I do think both arts and sciences are things that have one foot in the known and one foot in the unknown. And that all, you know, both of those types of disciplines, both what we think of as the creative in the arts and the scientific, which is methodical or more logical, I think they're both in that position of trying to know what is unknown yet and to ask a good question. So on the back of your card, I would like you to ask a question. You have something that you noticed, you have a simile, and finally, I'd like you to write on the back of that piece of paper where you've already written down what you've noticed and rewritten your simile. I'd like you to ask a question. Just like before, I'm not asking you to answer everything here, but I'm asking you to think of a question, like a hard question, like what's sitting on your heart or what you're afraid of, or you can think about what emotion you made your simile about and ask a question of your fear or your loneliness. Or sometimes you have like a mind question. So things about, you know, something that you've noticed. Like I saw some milkweed all fussed up and I was like, oh, it's too early for monarchs. What is that? And I saw that it was covered in aphids and I was like, oh no, I don't know any other milkweed nearby. And I got really concerned for the butterflies. Or where did you put your grandfather's watch? Like that's like backtracking through your brain for a certain kind of work. But some of our questions are very intellectual, mind-based questions, and other questions sort of come out of our heart. Why can't the heart stop asking? So the final thing I'd like you to write on the back of your card is your own question. Something about a feeling, something about a thought, but write a question as your third line. So you have something you noticed, a simile, and a question. So, one thing I noticed driving here was how the horizon looked white. And we know my simile. And so I like to call these accidental haikus. So one example I have from the past is today the cardinal singing despite the wind, my heart like the stain in a peach pit, can my love survive spring? Or today, the white heat on the horizon, peace is like a scream in space. God, oh God, why did it take me so long to find? So I like to call these like accidental haikus, because one, none of you came in here with the intention of writing anything. But I also love how 3 lines, somewhat written at random, can come together and be a poem. I've started taking note cards and just keeping them in the back of my pocket and kind of writing this way throughout the day. It's just something will pop into mind, or I'll live a poem and I'll see something or feel something that'll be like, oh, I should write that down. And then I have these little note cards that I can shuffle, and I don't have to sit down with like the intention to write about the meaning of life. I can just pull out these loose scraps and be like, oh, look at that. Those pieces together, just like when we tore the simile in half and created surprise. Sometimes a line or two from across a few days or few weeks even, and we just sit down and toss them together. We're like, wow, look at that, what these lines do together. Sort of like cooking with your, pantry ingredients. What do I got in here? Can kind of reveal something unexpected and accidental when you make some of these connections. So it's a really valid way to write. So even if you don't think of yourself as a poet, if you start writing down the things that you notice and some questions and occasionally a metaphor or two or simile, you can create more of these little accidental poems. But thinking about these, I would like to would anybody like to share their little accidental haiku?
I get you.
Okay.
A huge ditch digging machine appeared in our field first thing in the morning. Fear is like looking under a rock. If people can't be expected to act the way they should all the time, how often do they need to act the way they should?
Ooh. 70? The question, not the answer. I like the way. I was like, oh gosh, how often do I do what I'm supposed to do? Forget to work out all the time. Would you read yours?
Sure. I ate a glazed donut in my kitchen. Hope is like my dog in my lap. Would my day be sweeter with a forbidden tree?
Yes, I love that. You sort of leave and come back. Oh, so good. Anybody else want to read their accidental haiku?
If anybody wants to type their haiku into the chat, I can read it.
And you don't have to, or you can keep it to yourself, or you can share it with somebody later. But the Chinese poet Li Po would write poems, read them to the housekeeper who's usually doing something in the stream, probably laundry. And just trying to get her work done, and he's trying to read her poems. But then he would fold them into boats and set them in the river. And what I used to love about this story was this idea that like the act of creation meant something, and all you had to do was make the art and set it free. You didn't need to revise it and submit it for publication and then put it at your end of the year review and then share with your friends on Facebook. And like that wasn't what making a poem was about. But the more I thought about the story, the more I thought about the importance of this poor housekeeper who just wants to do the laundry. But how it was so important that he read it aloud. He didn't just make the art and put it in the river. Again, we think of like poets as these solitary people, but he read it, he shared it before folding it into a boat and setting it into the river. But that the act of sharing it is the thing that completes a piece of art, that somebody sees it, that somebody hears it. Doesn't have to sell out stadiums, but it has to be shared. And that connection with others is part of why we are making art a lot of times. We don't have to be seen by thousands, but to be seen by one other person, to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, is part of why we share. So again, you didn't have to share it here or online, but if you find somebody that you want to share that piece with, that would be really important, to share that with somebody at whatever time you're ready. So I feel like our poems, poetry is really great at helping us embrace surprise and really delight in it. To share that delight and to stay curious are three of the core things that I think poetry is good at. And hopefully it can help us write some more accidental poems if we're paying attention to our own attention. Oh, and then there's socials if you want to follow any of the work I'm doing as Poet Laureate of Kansas. So I do believe I have wrapped up, well, with only 5-6 minutes extra here. But does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
And we can go past the hour. a little bit.
Okay, and if there's any questions online, or if you did get any submissions of accidental haikus online that people would like to share.
Nothing online right now, but-
Okay,
but feel free to type those of you online.
nothing, I solved all of your curiosity about poems. Solved that.
I thought of, oh, when you stole those quotes, I thought of more quotes about
Okay.
what poetry is. One was, yeah, it was Walt Stevens who said that the poem should, no, is that, the poem should resist the intelligence almost successfully.
Ooh, I think I've heard that one, I like that one. I know Stevens had like 3 rules of poetry.
Oh, yeah, of all art.
All art,
But
okay.
poetry mainly, that's the most important.
Yes, and I have it listed in my journal, but I don't remember the book.
I know,
I remember what it must expand or
it
something.
must change,
Yes,
it must be abstract,
okay, that's the expand one.
yeah, and it must give pleasure.
Pleasure, see, surprise and delight, see,
Wordsworth thought the same thing.
me and Wallace Stevens, we both know.
Yep. Mhm.
I do collect, I foolishly did not bring my journal with me today, it's very sad. But, every time I start a new journal, I hand copy all of my favorite quotes, into it, and I, just like the questions, I just keep collecting, so half the journal is now just hand copying quotes. But I also believe in, I love it because, then I just have a bunch of quotes in my head of things that I love, which is great. But I also keep a journal where I hand copy poems that I love. I also have done this with passages of prose that I just thought were really beautiful. And I really recommend, because I've read poems, I've taught poems, I've even like memorized poems. Something different happened when I used old school handwriting. You can't type it and quite get the same effect. But hand copying letter for letter, something that is beloved to you, it totally changed my relationship with many poems. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never noticed how good those 2 words are together before. Because you just slow down and take your time with it in a way that you don't if you're typing it up. That's more like data entry at that point, for me and my brain and my hands. But if you were looking for a fun summer project, or if you keep a journal, I highly recommend, if you don't know what to write about your day sometimes, just to copy a poem or a quote that is beloved to you. I also really love, because then when I travel and I'm sometimes limited in space, I know what book to bring. I have like my copy of my favorite things. And it's always my answer to my desert island book. I would take all of my beloveds with me, because I have everything collected in one book. But I think it's a great way to deepen your relationship with something that you already love, is to do that hand copy. But that is 7:58. Library closes at 8. I can even get us out of here on time. Unless a question has occurred to anyone.
I've never done this, so this is really, crude thing. But I said, what does grandma mean?
Okay, but actually,
Well, it's baking cookies, unconditional love.
oh, I love that. It's really beautiful. Well, you've got like embracing the senses, you've got your question. I think that's really beautiful. And I don't think it's elementary at all.
I just want to see it back. But
Yeah, well, and I think there's no exactly doing it right. And that's also why the definition comes from a fourth grader. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I thought if it didn't have this and that and, you know, a rhyme with a color, then it wasn't a poem. And people, I think there's lots of rules that you can learn to bend and play with in poetry, just like you can learn things about line and color and paint if you're a painter. But I don't think there's a doing it wrong. And I think a lot of people got scared away from poetry in particular because we learned there was a lot of rules and then we were afraid we weren't doing it right. Um, yeah.
I like to, I know a lot of people that write poetry, read poetry, and vice versa. But I feel like, I started feeling like to me, reading poetry is a lot like writing it. And, you know, because when I read poetry, I sort of imagine myself into the act of writing the poem, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if that's your experience, but you know, that's kind of a lot of times when I'm rereading poems, I'm sort of trying to enter the creation space and think about the choice the poet made and the things that they could have done and didn't do, the matrix of possibilities that they chose the poem out of to bring it to us, you know, so. That's just a comment that.
Yeah, when I try, so the piece about surprise and wanting to surprise myself, I know this doesn't make sense, but what I have to do in order to write poems is make my mind slippery. If I try and write with my rational mind and my logical, like checking off my to-do list mind, I feel like the poem feels very forced and like I say all the expected things, I don't surprise myself. So I like when I read before I write, I'm often just trying to get into some sort of dream state or spell state or like just trying to get the brain to be slippery and associative, and then kind of dream with a pen in my hand. But if I do it with my thinking mind will be like, oh, that word's terrible, I'll cross that out and go back. You shouldn't even be writing this if you haven't fixed this part above. And my logical mind is my editor mind. She's mean to me. And she like also like wants it to be logical and orderly and accomplished, like and wants it to do all of these things. And so for me, the more slippery, so I like to listen to music sometimes. I like to read poets who write with a lot of music. And then I get kind of like dreamlike and associative, and then I can write in ways that something weird and surprising and fun happens. And then my mean brain can be like, okay, we're gonna switch this word, we're gonna break the line here instead. And then she can come in cleanup mode, but I can't create from my logic brain. My logic brain can edit all day long, fix that comma, absolutely, spell that word correctly, thank you. But if I try and make with my logic mind, I just feel bad about myself. So I've got to get in the playful state. Or watch something really bizarre or look at art, but I've got to get into that sort of magic associative dream brain in order to write the kinds of ways that make me feel good.
Would you tell us a bit about your book that's coming out in November? And I'm also curious I meant about the Amelia Earhart project. You want to say a little bit about that? I'm curious to hear about it.
Sure. I'm gonna do a talk at the Amelia Earhart Hanger Museum. I don't know if they'll broadcast that, but in the fall. But I found out that she was a poet and even submitted to Poetry Magazine, but under a pseudonym, because she, you know, had a very public identity, but was a lifelong reader of poems and writer of poems. Most of her poems were lost in a house fire that lost a lot of, you know, important documents. But there were still drafts and lines, and I think her logbooks very much read like poems. And there's still an old submission to Poetry Magazine that she made as Emil A. Hart, but she would share it with friends, and still wrote and submitted under pseudonyms. And so while there's not a robust amount, I still find it really interesting, especially with this very public figure, to look at something they did very privately and even, you know, chose to be anonymous or pseudonymous. in her life. And so, I did that work years ago, but I'm excited to talk to them about it. And people who know Earhart very well as an aviator and in many of the other roles that she had. But when she was she was the aviation editor for Cosmopolitan magazine, and she used to quote poems in her articles. But she and her sister would speak shorthand. They would speak in lines of poetry to each other even, and they would know what each other meant because they knew the same poems so well. But I love that she was a lover of poetry, of course. And we have the same birthday, so I'm like, ugh, total twinsies, just a few years apart, it's okay. So I love thinking about, but she clearly was also a craftswoman. Like she spent a lot of time on her lines, writing and revising, and I like watching the drafts change and like wondering about why she made the decisions that she made, what made that stronger? Do I agree that it's stronger? What was she going for? And a lot of times she was writing about, the aerial view of things and a lot about death, actually. Because at that time, right, like being an aviator was really rolling the dice on your life. Obviously, things, she did die, while flying. But also just she lost so many of her friends to plane accidents as well. And she trained doing some stunt work also because she knew you needed to know how to get out of your mistakes in order to be a good pilot. And I think that's very true of poetry. I think it's very true of life, that you need to get good at correcting your mistakes because it's going to happen. There's no flying perfectly or being human perfectly, so you better figure out how to barrel roll out of that thing. So I'll be doing a talk for them. I don't know if they're going to archive it or record it or anything, but there is also an article that is publicly searchable on her work, if you her poetry, if you'd like to look that up. And my book, Love Prodigal, is the idea of also fixing your mistakes, of things not going well in love or life and figuring out how to love again or how to get back up out of the hospital bed again after medical stuff or even some COVID stuff of like, how do you keep resurrecting yourself through your life the whole time? Because life asks you to pick yourself back up and keep going a lot more than I wish it did. But there's a lot of things that we have to overcome and keep going from. And the poems are often about how do you pick up and keep going after things seem really, really hard. Yeah. Thank you guys for spending this hour with me, and for coming out tonight when you could have been doing all sorts of things on a Monday.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I can turn off sign off the live stream now.